Good evening. Welcome to episode 3 of Blue Connections 2020. My name is Donna Ozarko and I am the Manager of Officials and Publications for Softball Canada.
And I'm Jeff Whipple, National Director of Umpires for Softball Canada. We're so excited you're able to join us again on this new journey. Blue Connections 2020 is designed to bring umpires together virtually to learn from some of our country's leading officials. These webinars will focus on basic techniques and expectations for officials, and will reference best practices on mechanics, game management, and fitness from both the WBSC and Softball Canada.
And just a reminder that all sessions will be recorded and available on our Softball Canada Umpire YouTube channel and Facebook pages. And if you have any questions for our presenters, you can leave them in the chat section and we'll pass the questions on to our presenters in the end. Tonight, we are pleased to present the third episode in this series as two of Canada's leading officials talk about one of the most important keys to becoming a better umpire, self-assessment through a post-game crew conference.
Sandra Forand has umpired fast pitch, but prefers the challenge of the slow pitch game. She earned her level 5 at the Men's Canadian Championships in 2015 and WBSC certification in 2017. Sandra is the only female internationally certified slow pitch umpire in the world and has represented Softball Canada at the European Championships in 2017 and the 2018 Border Battle. Sandy also officiated NCAA Division I and Canadian University basketball and is heavily involved in Special Olympics, most recently representing Canada as a basketball official at the 2019 World Games in Abu Dhabi. Sandy's from Welland, Ontario and works as a special needs educator, and she's also a member of Softball Canada's National Officiating Development Committee.
Tonya Ribalkin Zanon began officiating in 1991 when she first started calling on a field as a young teenager in British Columbia. She earned her level 5 in 2005 and achieved her WBSC certification in 2008. Since then, Tonya has supervised at 7 Canadian championships and officiated internationally at the World Games in Taiwan, World Cup softball in Oklahoma, Junior Women's World Championships in South Africa, Canada Cup, and the Women's World Championships here in Canada. In 2010, she moved to Calgary, where she now lives with her husband and 3 children. Tonya recently completed her Master's of Education and currently works as a teacher of the visually impaired. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise as we explore a valuable growth opportunity, post-game reflections.
Thank you, Donna. All right, so we'll get started. Tonya and I both wanted to say thank you to Jeff and to Donna and to Darren Giroir for adding us to this crew. This is an awesome crew, so thank you very much. Preparing for a post game, especially when it's a contentious game, you need to talk it over, and sometimes that's more difficult than others. But we think that you're missing an incredible opportunity if you don't have that conversation. So we feel that you need to take time and prepare for that. And when you look around the diamond, you see the teams huddling, they're coming off the diamond, they're having their discussions, and we're a team as well. When we met earlier in the season with Blue Connections 2020, Scott McLaren and Jen Goudreau and myself and Jeff and Donna, we talked about the premise of a solid pregame, but there needs to be a post-game as well, because there's more than, you need that to have a good game on the diamond, and then you're preparing for your next game with your learnings from that game. Whether you go to provincials, Eastern, Westerns, Canadians, World Championships, fast pitch, slow pitch, a post-game with supervisors is expected. And so why not prepare for it with your partners? during your pregame, you might consider, you could say to your partner, would you mind staying a few extra minutes that we can just talk about the game after we've completed it? You might go to a designated spot if you have a combination crew. You might do that after you get changed, but allow for the discussion of the game situations. It's an opportunity for growth around rules, positioning, mechanics, and it really builds rapport with that person you just umpired with to now further that development.
And just also want to bring up, like, building that rapport really also leads to those lifelong friendships that we attain doing this game. Okay, so leading into our post game with our partners. So next slide, please, Jeff. Thank you. The poster on this page, "The Expert in Anything Was Once a Beginner," is actually a poster that I had in my classroom when I was a classroom teacher. And it really is true. Throughout our opportunities as officials, we are going to work with more and less experienced partners. And so a post game, regardless of who we're working with and what experience they bring into the game, is extremely valuable. And everyone has something to share, and no one has a perfect game. We're always learning, and no matter the experience of who you're working with, know that they are working to be better. So when you have your pregame, and as Sandy was talking about, is that ask your partners if there's something that you want them to look at with your game. So knowing what you've been told to work on, what you've noticed yourself in your game, bring that up with your partner and say, hey, could you watch, I've been told I might get a little low as a plate umpire calling balls and strikes. Could you just check my height level with batters? Things like that, and it leads that then into a post game afterwards and helps just ease your partner's comfort level in wanting to have a post game with you. And really think about, if we leave games immediately after, we're really missing out on this valuable growth opportunity. So make sure you make some time for it. And then really ask your partners questions. So if you have a question of where they were on a certain play, just ask, say, hey, when you had that call at second base, I noticed that you veered over to the third base side. Why did you do that? What were you thinking of? I don't think that I may have gone to that position. But by asking those questions, you're going to learn some insight into how other people see the game, which can also lead us into being better officials as well. And most importantly, with our game, we need to be able to have fun. We need to be able to laugh at ourselves. Some of the best times on the diamond we talk about for years, sometimes decades later. Certain play, I fell on the diamond, and I remember Hans Trolson from BC making fun of me. It was written up on the board. We had a blackboard in the dressing room. Shows how old I am. It was a blackboard, and on it he had drawn a picture of a stick figure tripping over what he said was an imaginary bat. There was a bat there. But we really need to have fun. You can talk about maybe a certain comment from the crowd, or something a coach said, or just anything that came up that is different, that often only the umpires really do understand.
Right, and you can do that. Sometimes those discussions happen during the game. And we really have to be careful of that, because we don't want to draw attention to ourselves after a really critical play. We might leave it for an inning and then have that discussion as we go to a sideline. And that's okay too, but you don't want to point at a play. You don't want to point, well, when that player was over there. But having said that, if you were with a brand new umpire, those are opportunities that we can help each other on the diamond and strengthen the crew right there at the game, right?
Absolutely.
Right, so post-game with supervisors. Jeff, the next slide, please. So here, I think, what is the goal of the supervisor? And it's true in just every job that we have, there needs to be somebody that's the supervisor in some regard. And I went back as a level 5 this year, and I had been a supervisor for three or four summers in a row or whatever. I think that's the toughest job. It was like umpiring was so much easier than supervising, especially with the larger crews. Supervisors want you to do your best. They're looking that if you have an opportunity and you have a supervisor that just, you rise to the occasion, they've truly done their jobs. And in all of those championships, you're going to have that supervisor there. And I know when I'm a supervisor, I want to show that you're in this crew and the game is better because you're in this crew. So I want to bring it up. I personally rate my game as an umpire from 1 to 10. And by the end of the weekend, I'll total it up, kind of thing. And I think that for me, that's a gauge of where I can be the next game or the next tournament. So as a supervisor, I'll often open discussions by asking the umpire, give me a rating from 1 to 10. If 10 is perfect, where did you see this game? And often an umpire will come with like a 5. And they're, okay, so you can ask the questions. Where do you see in the game that maybe you could have bumped that up a bit? Or what do we need to bump that up? Or I've even had situations where an umpire or an official say, oh, I had a 10. No problem, I had a 10. Well, okay, you had a contentious situation with a coach. Could we have handled that a little bit differently? Could we have de-escalated it earlier? So you can always use that rating. I think it's a positive thing to do. Tips for the post game: be honest with your supervisor. So if your supervisor says to you, what did you see on that play? And you tell them the truth, like, we're in the stands. They're a fair distance away, and you're right there on the play. And now, given dynamic positioning where you need to readjust and to get that open look, I think that discussion is going to happen often because umpires are now trying to create a better look. But honestly, the things you learn in kindergarten, and you know that there's a time and a place you need to listen when that time is occurring. They're there for a reason. You got that wonderful assignment, and so did they. They got that assignment for a reason. And they have a wealth of things, information and background and things that they've had in their lifetime to share with you. So provide them the opportunity to listen with intent to understand. There is a difference between truly listening and waiting for your turn to talk. Body language. Be aware of your posture and your arms, especially if you come off a tough game and you're tired. And Tonya, you were talking about, you were at a game. Maybe you want to talk about that real quick, where somebody talked to you about your...
Yeah. So I can't even recall what tournament it was. It was when I was a little bit newer of an official, and it was post game. It was incredibly hot out, and after the game, we would have our discussions with our supervisor before we got changed. And so you'd come off the diamond, you'd be placed in this hot room and have your debrief, which debriefs really right afterwards and a little bit later on, they all have their place and their purpose. But it was after that debrief that a good friend who was also on that game came and said, Tonya, you need to watch what you look like. And when they explained to me what I was doing, it was pretty much,
yeah.
And just my arms were crossed. And for me, sitting with my arms crossed is a very comfortable position, but it shows something else to who's giving me that information, because it closes me off. And by just being so tired and hot, I looked unengaged and like I wasn't prepared to learn. So just be aware of the language that you're portraying to your supervisors.
And that's even on the diamond, right? When you're dealing with coaches, if you're standing there like a police officer, well, that's how you're going to be perceived. So visual happens on the diamond, of course, as well. Ask questions in that post game, because I mean, we've all had tournaments where there might be a conflict of information between the DUIC and the UIC on, could be anything. And so they need to know right away if there is misinformation. And say you don't understand exactly what is the direction from the supervisor, clear it up. You have that supervisor, that's your time right there. They're spending that time with you. They're there for you. So let's deal with it as quickly as we can. Take time to record what was said. I personally write things down, but others you can tape record it. Tonya, you wanted to talk about what you do. We do completely different in our
do. And this led to, well, mine and Sandy's pregame before this presentation in talking about this. And Sandy was like, what, you don't record it right away? And I brought up a time when I was actually asked to record it right away. And I felt that took away from my learning in the session. And so for me, I like to listen to the supervisor. I like to watch. I'm a very visual learner, but I'm also an oral learner. And so for me, I internalize it first. I reflect on it. And then I also visualize myself doing whatever they've mentioned that I need to work on. And then I record it. So sometimes I'll record it in the dressing room. Often I actually wait until I'm home in a private area where I can really reflect and internalize it myself. And then that's when I record it. And that book is full of a lot of notes. I've never shared it with anybody else. I don't know if anyone else could read it. It's quite messy with a lot of short form in it. But that's what works for me.
Perfect. And it's whatever does work for you. So notes for supervisors. You need to prepare for your post game. I use Coach's Eye. I like to use Coach's Eye a lot. The information you're giving the umpire, you need to back it with why. They need to know. So in a crew of 2 or 3, I want to be able to involve everybody, unless it's a sensitive issue, positives, and then a few things to work on. It'll depend on the level of umpire, the level of game, the tournament. I personally like to let the umpire know this is the most important thing I think you should work on, especially with less experienced umpires. A, B, C. This is your most important thing. The next thing. Know your audience, read your team. You need to really, truly be sensitive. Tonya, you were talking about a UIC, DUIC situation.
Yeah, so it was at a Canadian championship, and a play had happened on the diamond that was very contentious. It was in the winner-winner game, and my team and I, as supervisors, were working with coaches, but we also needed to debrief with our team. And so there was 3 of us, and it was decided that myself and Daryl Helmer would go in to talk to our crew. And we had our plan, we had it set, we knew exactly how we were going to approach it. But when we got in there, we realized that our crew had beaten themselves down so much on that call that we had to take it in a completely different direction. So it's really being knowledgeable of your crew, watching their own language, whether it's body language, silent, verbal, and moving on from there. But remembering that we want these umpires to come back. We want them to want to come back, and and to learn from the situation. And I know if Daryl were on this call, he would agree that team did learn. And Daryl and I learned a lot too. I always learn when I supervise. So after the game, so after your post game, when you're going into kind of your own self-reflection mode. So Jeff, next slide, please. Thank you. Really be aware of what you can control. So Scott McLaren a while ago in the 3rd team on the field that was done for Softball Canada, he spoke about knowing your bubble. So controlling what's in your bubble. And really the only thing that we really can control is the way that we react and what we end up doing from there. And actions are always louder than words. And then really be honest with yourself. So Sandy does the rating to 10. For me, a rating doesn't work in that way with a numeric, but more of a, excellent, great, very good, good, satisfactory from there. But really being honest with how I performed and what I did. And there's always something, even if it was an excellent game, there's still something that I could have done better. And don't beat yourself up. I can be the worst at negative self-talk, presented on this at Blue Convention. And looking at yourself in the mirror and saying it to yourself, but putting a positive on it. So maybe I'm not ready for this league yet. I find that word yet really, really helps. And don't forget to breathe. Just a few deep breaths in and out, count them out, just really helps just to relax our bodies. Oh, and when you're looking in the mirror, don't forget to smile. And remember, do you have a post-game routine? So most umpires have a pre-game routine. I have a playlist that I listen to. My umpire gear, Sandy laughed at this earlier, has to go on the same way every single time. If I put the one shin guard on a different way, I actually will take my gear off and get dressed again. I don't advise that you do that. But I also have a post-game ritual. So there's a certain way that my equipment also gets removed. There's a certain way I pack my bag. I also have a playlist. So I have a pre-game playlist in my car as I'm driving to the game, or even on my iPod before a tournament. I also have a post-game playlist with some more relaxing kind of reflection music that I do listen to. So find what works for you, but consider having a post-game ritual if you don't already have one.
Yeah, and it's when we do make mistakes, that's how we have our learnings. That's how people develop as officials, is if you have a perfect game, there's not learning going on there. There may be practice, but it's when you are, something is presented to you and you have to deal with it, that's how you learn. So we're going to go into implementation. So this is not technically part of the post game, but let's have a look at this picture. So using your post game for your next pre-game. So you're getting ready for the next game, review your notes, sit in the bleachers. Look at these three are having a good time in the bleachers. When I first looked at this picture, I thought, Jen's the supervisor though. She's got a book and she's looking right at the diamond, and Tonya's enjoying her time out there and
counting it up for the camera.
Right. And so you want to go watch your fellow umpires, but you don't want to sit with the supervisor, because that's their time to concentrate on that next crew, and you don't want to sit with players. And you can, as passing, talk to players, but that's something that's noticeable. So you want to go and you want to support the crew and be there in the stands.
Sorry, my timer's going off there.
Hey, that's right on time.
Pretty much. I just want to add, some of my best learning opportunities happen in the stands, especially when I grew up in BC, having the opportunity to be at the Canada Cup and watch those experienced elite umpires work, and then sit in the stands with some of them with my own teammates and watch, and just even discussing, if a coach was talking to one of the umpires on the field, hey, what do you think they're talking about? What do you think they're saying? So many of the things that are now in my own repertoire were learned by sitting in the stands. That's right. So really valuable learning opportunity.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Whipple, you're back on screen here.
Well, that was very interesting. A couple of questions that have sort of percolated up. First of all, so you've talked about post-game chats with your colleagues. And so a question that came up really quickly was, what about all those games you do at your local park every night? And you do a couple of games with a partner and 5 nights a week. Should you be doing a post-game after each one of those, especially if it's with somebody that you know and work with on a regular basis?
I think for myself, I probably work 3 nights a week, I think, and I evaluate one night as well. if it's somebody I'm working with and something goes down though, and there's a contentious call or there's a close call or there's an appeal play, I'm going to talk to my partner during that game, probably an inning later, an inning and a half later, but definitely we need to talk about it. And even afterwards, I might send a message, say we've got to go, we've got time constraints. I might message them and say, what did you think about that? And I think that's valuable in itself.
And for myself, I would say I have a post game every game. And usually, especially if it's someone that I work with a lot, it's quick. But as we're getting changed, as we're packing up, it's a quick conversation like, hey, what did you think of this? Or was my strike zone a little off on the outside? I didn't feel quite as confident with it this game. What did you think? And I think it just leads to more opportunities. And yeah, sometimes absolutely very, very quick. I also think it's very important for those of us that also work one umpire systems, which we can quite a bit, is making sure that you do still set time to do that post game with yourself.
Mark Goff says, if pictures are worth 1,000 words, imagine how much can be taught with a video. Is video almost a prerequisite now?
I use it a lot, but I mean, there's been some sticky situations with video in amateur softball, in slow pitch, and it can get into hot situations. I've seen it happen where people were videotaping and then it got brought back up to the umpires. It takes something away from the game, though, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it depends on the purpose for the video, really. But I mean, if someone's sharing with me something that I'm doing, if I can see it, as Mark said, a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's huge if I can actually see myself in that position, what I'm doing. I find it's even easier to fix it once I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
So Bradley Craven jumps in. He says, when doing post games, should you include X's and O's on the plays by drawing them up with younger umpires? How important is that sport board that everybody carries around with them? Do you guys have one in your trunk?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we, for fast pitch, especially with positioning, I'm sure you do, Sandy, too, in slow pitch, it's essential. I mean, we use it in the pregame to talk about positioning, and it should absolutely be used in the postgame. If we have it, use it, especially as you get higher up in the levels, if you're working internationally, or even with our good friends in Quebec. We all don't speak French. I'm not going to speak it now because I'll butcher it. But by being able to draw it, it's another way of communicating. So why not use it?
I think it's essential. I really do. I think people are different learners, and by verbally just giving a scenario, there's a connection there. But when you draw it out and you move and say, I could have probably moved this direction, and I might have had that open look if I'd just gone a little bit further. And when you see that, like I have a magnetic board for a little thing for basketball that we use in our pregame and postgame. I have the same for umpiring as well. I think it's critical to every single umpire to have those kind of tools.
Couple more quick questions. The post-game get-together, this is from Dwayne Bakken. Post-game get-together is almost a precursor to the next game, especially in a tournament situation.
Yes.
Do you agree taking that as constructive umpiring so your head is in the right place?
Absolutely. And Sandy and I have talked, like after her presentation with her pre-game board last week, is adding on that list post-game.
Yeah.
So when are we going to get together? When are we going to talk? And having that as part of your pre-game, what are we going to talk? When are we going to talk for the post-game? And then using your post-game for your next pre-game.
I think that's essential, especially, for example, people at their first time going to a Canadian, and they're dealing with different levels of umpires. You might have a 3, you might have a 4, you might have a 5. And what you learn in those situations as an inexperienced umpire, you can take that, bang, you got it, you can take it to your next game. And that's when, as a supervisor, when you see that kind of growth in an umpire, like it's just phenomenal, because they're taking those games as they go along, and it's just so rewarding. It gives me chills just to think about an umpire developing through a championship. I love it.
Mm-hmm. One last question, Tonya. Inquiring minds want to know. Well, at least Darren Gerard wants to know.
Oh no.
What's your pre-game music? AC/DC?
Actually, having gone to school in Nova Scotia, just up the road from Darren, fell in love with Great Big Sea. So there's some Great Big Sea in there. There's also some Pink. Love Myself Today. That's kind of my go-to.
Yeah. What about postgame?
My husband laughs because it was actually part of my labor mix with my kids. But a lot of Enya and Robert Miles.
Cool.
Cool. Sandy, do you have a mix?
Not lately. I don't. Not lately. I did when I was on my way up, and when I was doing NCAA, I always had a little stereo. Remember the old little stereo boxes they used to have? Like, I love that. Something really outgoing there. Something fast. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, well, listen, thank you two for your insights tonight. This was really good, and I think there's some real good nuggets for everybody to take out of here. So thank you for spending the time with us, and I'm sure we'll see both of you back as the series continues at some point.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good night.
So that completes episode 3 of Blue Connections 2020 the Blue Connections 2020 webinar series. Thank you to Sandra and Tonya for sharing their time and expertise. And a special thanks goes out to Level 5 umpire Darren Gerard for his work as co-producer of this series.
Nice.
Join us next week as Matt Whipple, yes, there's a relation, and Valerie Pellick discuss how umpires of all shapes and sizes can look like a pro.
Cool.
And just a reminder that Blue Connections 2020 will be available later on the Softball Canada Umpires YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And we look forward to seeing you all next Sunday. Have a fantastic night, everyone. And thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.